Hello, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you here for a new episode of Voices of Innovation. And the goal of these conversations is to unpack biotech careers and explore how this sector works for anyone interested in learning more. Your career is truly impressive. It spans multiple markets and roles. You're currently serving as president of UC Biologics, which develops thermostable vaccines against Lyme disease. But you started as a scientist and work in neuroscience, public health, medical devices, high tech, and now, of course, infectious diseases. So let me start from the very beginning. Can you give me an overview of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to do this, and you really do. Your work that you're doing here is very important because there are a lot of folks who are looking at the different ways their career can go, and they start in a place that they think makes a ton of sense, and for a lot of folks it does, but it also makes a lot of sense to move over to other types and still do some really great work. So. For me personally, my first work in the research realm was in neuroscience, specifically looking at genetic substrates of schizophrenia. And this was earlier work, but we were using MRI technology to look at morphological changes in brains, differences in brains between people identical and co-twins. They're fraternal twins. And when they had schizophrenia or they didn't. And that was my undergraduate, my baccalaureate work. Now, when I moved out of my school area, I went over into public health after a few stints, a couple other places. And then in public health, it was a very different side. It was far into the clinical research side, where we were studying vaccine uptake and breast cancer screening and diabetes testing in different populations that don't always have the same access to healthcare as other folks. So the underserved populations in America specifically, African American, Native American, the elderly, those kinds of populations across the board. I moved over into the medical technology space, into hips and knees and spine, and the tools that you use for surgeries, and working directly with orthopedic surgeons. And then I moved over into the infectious disease space, which is US Biologic, and working on ways to stop these really, really bad diseases that are a global level, focusing first on Lyme disease, which is 500,000 Americans every year, and really also equally devastating in multiple parts of Europe. And how is it that you can break up that infectious disease cycle by looking at multiple species? And as you say, through orally delivered thermostable vaccine technologies and the ways that really happens. And in each of these cases, I've contributed a bit to the science as I could across multiple of those stages. I do not call myself a professional scientist. I am not a PhD or a medical doctor or a veterinarian doctor for that matter. But my goal has been to work with these subject matter experts, getting them the resources they need, but then also helping with the public policy, and then ultimately the intellectual property work, but then also the sales and distribution networks that they need in order to get their programs to market. And of course, regulatory assistance is in there as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And you mentioned the fact that, of course, you started studying science and neuroscience, and of course, over the years, you move into strategic executive roles throughout your career. You held positions like VP, board member, president now, fractional executive positions here and there. What motivated that transition?
For me, it just became aware of my passion led. In my case, in the science piece, there's an incredible amount of excitement and discovery and being able to follow where your curiosity lies, and working with a lot of really great folks in a laboratory setting. Mm-hmm. I began to realize that I was more passionate about impact for me, about a larger impact in terms of where this science is going to be translated and being created to make really valuable tools, specifically in biotech and healthcare. So my transition, really started leaving the laboratory for the first time and going into different spaces and seeing how the application of those technologies A was very complicated and sophisticated in and of itself, a very fascinating process. But B, really understanding, how it can make the impact on individual lives and just see their lives get better and see how it is that they are being changed, not only from a direct health perspective, but also a quality life perspective. With Lyme disease, for example, it's a terrible neurologic and degenerative disorder. It affects your joints, it affects your brain. It can have cognitive issues, and it can even be fatal in cases where you have heart issues. And, to see the devastation that causes those individuals who have Lyme disease, if they're not treated or if they don't respond to that treatment, is profound. It really is incredible. And it really does focus you in on, how is it that we can take this really cool technology that was created by subject matter experts and researchers? In our case, the original was Maria Gomes-Selecki, who's a professor at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. And then it was expanded tremendously by our chief scientific officer, Dr. 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀 𝗍𝗏, as they translated that base technology into the broader case of real world usage. So for me, that transition really was about understanding how we get from the point of this great, cool discovery that, is very interesting from a system standpoint, but then translate it over and get it into real world impact. And that's just where my passion lies. Other folks, I 100% love scientists who deep dive into the curiosity part, who deep dive into the discovery part that is so essential and so important to what they're doing. It's just the other side's important too. That's where
you need both sides in order to basically have that discovery reaching the patients, actually making a difference to society. So I
agree. You're right.
Was it an easy transition for you? How did you find it?
That's a great question, and I think that's a very important question for a lot of folks. There were places where it was quite challenging, and I think it always comes down to language. What is that metric of success? When you're looking in the science realm, you're looking at statistical significance. You're looking at how does this answer a couple questions, but then leads to several more questions. How does this either give you some evidence that your hypothesis is on the right track, or how does this evidence change where your hypothesis is going and what that changes for your next questions and your next steps? When you transition over into more of creating a product, you have to look at a lot of different types of language. There's a regulatory language, and what are those metrics of success? There's a business side of it, and what are those metrics of success? There's a manufacturing piece of it, and what are those metrics of success? And how is it? And there's quality also, of course, and one of those metrics. And you have to really you have to understand how the basic science piece answers a couple of questions, but it also you can go way down far the field and answer questions that really are not criteria for success in regulatory and manufacturing. And so when I've worked with scientists before, and I've seen this myself in my own case, why are we doing this experiment? It doesn't answer anything new for us in our laboratory. And you say, well, actually, let's change that. This is an experiment. This is a developmental project because we're trying to answer the questions the regulatory body is asking, right? And we need to show evidence that they are specifically asking. This won't be published, right? This won't go into a patent. It's quite often a replication of something you've already done, right? And it's quite often something that I wouldn't say that it's boring, because it's still incredibly technically sophisticated, the things that they're doing. But it doesn't satisfy that curiosity aspect. And so that could be very challenging for folks. And it was challenging for me as well. And you have to learn a different vernacular. You have to learn the different criteria of success to launch it forward. And that could be difficult. That could be challenging for folks. I'll give one more comment, a very difficult thing sometimes for scientists to work with. They will work with a disease that's devastating. Okay, they will absolutely is devastating for the people who have it. However, there's a big challenge sometimes, and that sometimes the market, the people who want the vaccine, who will pay for the vaccine, I'm giving a vaccine example, but it goes across all of those. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of revenue necessarily there. And this is difficult. Even though there's a huge need, might not be a huge market. And those are two very different things. And you have to find a balance somehow, finding, how is it that you're, creating things that are very important for human health, but also is something where you can do this. You can, by the way, most cancer therapeutics are for rare cases of cancer sometimes, right? And so and you have folks like the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital who really work on those very small number of cases, okay? Those don't have commercial viability, right? They're not going to go to thousands and thousands of people because the case doesn't happen there. And so you have to work through that. You have to find where you can get that balance of satisfaction for the societal impact, but also you do need a good business plan. You have to, because otherwise you won't get the funding. You won't get either the investment funding or you won't get, the private funding in general in order to get that product to market. And then you help no one if you can't do that. It sits on a shelf and that helps nobody. So you have to find that balance. And that's something you have to very deliberately go into and look at. What is the language? What are the criteria of success? How do I balance out the impact with the financial plan, right? And you can do it. Obviously, lots of people do. Very successful, very meaningful ways, but it takes work.
Absolutely. And I think that you touch on something that's very interesting, like something I think scientists often struggle with when maybe transitioning to business themselves in a business role or working within a commercial setting, is that they are trained to be extremely cautious in their statements, and of course always mindful of scientific rigor and the fact that research is never truly done. And it's difficult because, of course, in a commercial setting, you need that business agility, fast decision making. How do you balance that within a commercial?
Yeah. In the commercial side of it, you have to be able to say two things very, very rigorously from a science standpoint, very rigorously without compromise. One is safety. Okay. You have to be able to say 100% this meets our safety standards as we agree upon and as the regulatory body agrees upon and as the market accepts, all three of those. That's sacrosanct. You can't get away from that. Now, everything has complications. Listen to a pharmaceutical commercial and they'll list at the end the 15 or 20 known complications, okay? But what happens is there's basically saying from a science standpoint, clinical standpoint, when I say science, I mean from the laboratory all the way through when you have animal outcomes for animal products or for human outcomes when you have human products. You have to all be able to agree and stay very closely on what does safety mean and express that appropriately, right? Now, the second piece of this is where a lot of folks will say, well, this is just marketing. These are marketing claims, but they're actually based on your regulatory claims. Our product does this. This is what it does. That's all that it does. There's no, I would love to say that I can make, a piece of candy that stops heart disease and cancer and diabetes all at once. Okay. I'd love to be able to say that. And you know what? Potentially it could. Why not? Right. There's all sorts of cool discoveries. But I would never do that. I would say, here's the product. The regulatory agency and my company have agreed on this point, right? And then we will be very careful to stay with that. So what you see instead are a lot of pharmaceutical folks, and they'll have these commercials where they're showing a lifestyle that could potentially be enabled by the product itself. You don't see them talk about the product itself. You don't see them actually talk about the claims of the product, right? And so that can make a lot of folks uncomfortable, especially from the science side. They have to find a balance by saying, look, are we being true to our safety claims? Again, which are immutable. You don't change those. Those what it is. You have to be safe. But two, are you making claims that are true as based on that claim from the USDA? You can't go way too far over by saying here's the potential of it, right? You can't go way too far over in terms of, here's how the impact is on your life and how well it's going to work, right? You have to find that medium to communicate that to the public, right? And if it's done well, and if it's done correctly, and I think by and large it is, you can have something that you both can communicate the benefits of whatever the treatment or the prevention is to the public, right? But at the same time, stay true to the science. And I think that's where you have to work a lot. You have to have a lot of discussions, a lot of times to really home in on what that is and find the appropriate message.
Yeah. And communicating clearly what you do in terms of, scientific research is very important, of course, in a commercial setting. I think that sometimes scientists may struggle in conveying their expertise and, of course, what they're doing, their projects clearly to a non-expert audience. And this is very important. Like, for example, if you're moving into a business position within a company, you will be at some level be interacting with investors, for example, other stakeholders outside the company. What do you suggest scientists to help them present their science clearly?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge that when you're working with non-scientists, and you mentioned investors, which are a very important group, I would suggest this is true with regulatory agencies. I would suggest this is also true talking to physicians when this has not been, in their hands yet and going to their patients. And this is true with policy leaders, who aren't too exposed yet. And then, of course, the general public. You have to remember, these people are intelligent. Okay, these are sophisticated people. Any human being on this planet is an intelligent, sophisticated person. However, their background and their vocabulary and their understanding of some of these nuances are very different. Okay, and very different just based on their experiences and their training and those sort of things. And so you have to figure out where that is for them, right? And you have to be able to communicate clearly. And the second thing you have to do is recognize that the uptake of the material will be quite slow, right? Whenever you have a conversation, people take away from it a very small amount, right? They will not be able to deep dive into a lot of the detail that you would like to give them because you're so passionate about it and it's so very cool and you really love to talk about this. You really need to take a step back and go, okay, what's this first deep dive into how it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? And people have to think about that a lot. I think the second thing is very difficult. And we saw this in COVID, unfortunately. COVID was a good example of how not to talk to people about health, frankly. It really was. You had scientists go to the podium who had the authority, who understood what they were talking about, but they talked about things like scientists do. They would say things like, well, here's a thing, but here's the 5 reasons we don't know if it's true, right? Which is a very difficult way to communicate these things to the public. Instead, it needs to be more of a message of, here's the things that we know, and here's why you still have to be careful, and here's the ways you can protect yourself. And it needs to have these definitive statements, because otherwise, to a lot of folks who don't understand science, they just think you're waffling. They just think that you don't know specifically what you're talking about, whereas you actually know the very deep nuances of it. But on the other hand, you're not communicating as such. It's like if someone tried to explain to me what was going on in the Kardashians, okay? They would come to me and I'd be like, all right, there's a family. I get that part. Okay, let's go from there. And they say, well, this happened. But remember, these 17 contextual things have happened in the last 7 episodes, right? And I would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I am not following you on this. I don't have a background in commercial television or in pop culture or watching this show. I just don't know what you're talking about. And you're giving these very sophisticated, nuanced explanations for this show, The Kardashian, where you are really good expert at. You are a subject matter expert there. But me as a layperson, you're gonna have to go slow. You're gonna have to give me some statements that I can start building off of. So, does that make sense? It's just,
absolutely.
I don't think personality is important because, you have to think about this when you're starting. Let me be clear about this. This goes the other way too, okay? I'm working with marketing folks frequently. I'm not a marketing person or a salesperson, but I work with them. And they're going to jump into these deep metrics of how they measure success, okay? They'll say, well, here's social media hits and here's impressions. and here's where we see, the level of engagement. And then here are how we translate this over, and here are the dollars, and here's the money going in. I mean, all of a sudden people start glazing over because there's a lot of really sophisticated technical stuff that's going on there. Yeah. And the scientists don't necessarily know what it is either, right? And so we have to find a way to come in the middle to talk in the same language. And that takes a lot of conversation, getting to know each other, and really very goal-directed ways of talking to each other. Otherwise, you really won't get on the same page, and you won't understand the impact, you won't understand the science, and you won't understand the way to get it to people, get it out there, to get it to help people at all.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting. You definitely need a translator in the middle between, for example, marketer people and scientists. And also scientists have this mentality of always finding the doubt of what they're saying. So yes, I made the discovery, but let me go deep in the research for 5 more years before I can say, yeah, this is true, because I'm gonna check all different in all the different directions that could counterfact what I just said.
100% correct.
Marketeers are basically the opposite.
Yeah, but the investors and the marketing people, they have to understand this. They have to understand the same thing. If they can't take the one statement they wanted to hear, this could cure Alzheimer's, okay, and then run with it. They have to be very disciplined on their side as well. The manufacturing folks, the regulatory and the quality folks are 100% the same way. They have to, when they talk with scientists, right, they have to understand these caveats. They have to understand these nuances. So they have to become, in their own way, subject matter experts from what they do. And that's where so much of my career inadvertently has been doing that. We're sitting at a table with the different divisions and saying, okay, guys, we know what the goal is. Okay, we're going to go help people with whatever thing we have. So let's all get on the same page. And there can be a lot of emotion. There can be a lot of defensiveness. There can be a lot of cross lines and miscommunications. And you have to very slowly unpack each piece of this until we all get on the same page. And then there's going to be, over time, a lot of course corrections. Person A, when I heard person A say this, I heard this. Person B, what did you hear? Because then you all of a sudden realize they didn't hear the same thing at all. They did not get the same message at all. And you have to go back and correct that. And that's just part of the process. And it's a daily thing, I think. It's a culture. It's a culture of an organization to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And over the years, you work closely with many scientific founders, many scientists. What were the main gaps that you've seen between the scientific vision and the business execution?
Yeah, that is a great question. I've been very lucky. I've worked with experts in the basic research field. I've worked with public health experts. I've worked with caretakers, physicians, nurses, veterinarians, even technicians in the field. I've worked with the data folks, who are statisticians and, analysts from that side. But I've also gotten to work with the manufacturing, the regulatory folks. And US Biologic, for example, we have relied so much on Dr. Van Oosterwijk, who I mentioned. Dr. Russell John Brooke is our VP of Regulatory and Data. He was the one who constructed this whole piece of how it is you talk to the USDA. And also Dr. Steven Zatechka, who is our VP of Manufacturing. And, in these cases, you asked specifically then, what are the gaps? I start by saying this, okay? I will never do what they do. Okay, I will never work in a laboratory. In fact, I'm not really allowed in the US Biologic laboratories. I have very large man hands and I break things. Inadvertently, I don't mean to, but I'm pretty clumsy. Okay, I don't know how to cut. Okay, I'm never going to pick up a wrench and try to go build a machine in the manufacturing organization and manufacturing facility. However, they can learn what I know. Frankly, they can. It's experiential. I have gained my skills over the last 20 years a little bit more now, I guess, trying to help these organizations from founding through creating the product to getting the product out there, okay, and all the pieces that come into them. They can do the same thing, right? By the way, I'm not an accountant or a lawyer either, right? I mean, but I get to work with everybody. I get to absorb what they're doing. I get to piece them all together, and I keep working with them each on their subject matter expertise. They are brilliant in the things they do, but they also can translate over to what I do, right? So I think that's the first step. I tell everyone this: there's not a divide, and you know why I know this? Because I see scientists all the time become really good entrepreneurs and really good business owners, right? And I think if they have that intent, if they want to learn and that sort of thing. So here's what I think the number one gap is, however, for the folks who don't become successful in translating over. They don't want to. They don't want to. They don't want to learn. They don't want to ask for advice. They don't want to hear what other people and what other experts would hear, right? In fact, when people are curious and asking their own questions, I've seen people who get very angry because they feel that those questions means that no one believes them when they say things, right? So the real key gap for anyone who is not successful for making that transition from a subject matter expert into the business realm, okay, is they're not willing to learn things. They're not willing to get that experiential, piece of it. You can read books on how to do a startup, okay? And I appreciate that, and I respect the people who write those books, and I think it's always good to learn from a book. Unfortunately, in this world, in entrepreneur world, there's really nothing that changes from doing the work, being in the middle of it, trying to understand that so much of your day is trying to find the best decision out of a bunch of bad options. That is emotionally different, and you take on a whole new level of understanding of how pieces fit together, right? And then you're able to also bring into all of the different crazy that comes from the outside world, all those influences that are actually impacting what you do. So again, I really admire the hell out of scientists who are able to come over the business side. It's not something I can do. Just again, it's not going to happen. But it takes a lot of work on their part and a lot of experiential. And I admire them.
Yeah. And you mentioned the fact that you absorbed a lot during your career from different roles, different professions, of course, and then trying to translate into business strategy. For example, thinking about a scientist that wants to move into business, how could they earn trust without a traditional business background? Yeah.
I think a couple of different things. Unfortunately, when you're walking through this and you have a career like mine and you get to talk to all sorts of great folks, there will be misconceptions on all sides. Okay. There will be a misconception from a business side that the scientist folks are not practical, that they don't understand the business world or the real world, that they're naive in many cases, and all that's false, right? There'll be perceptions from the scientist side. I've seen it many times. The business folks are liars. They don't care about human health. They just want the money. That they will expressly misattribute scientists and take away authorship and those kinds of things, and all that's false as well. I mean, you have bad actors. Of course you do. You have bad actors. And so what I encourage scientists to do is sit down and talk to folks, accept mentorship, reach out to individuals, not only some business folks in the field, but also people who have made that transition from being a scientist into a successful, business person as well, and who combine the two. And you build those mentorships, and you have those mentors introduce you to more people in the field. So if I have someone whom I trust, if 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀 𝗣𝗿 came to me, and I trust her immensely, right? Worked with her for many years. I've seen her make this transition over. She's been very successful. Dr. 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗆𝗆 has done the same thing. Dr. Russell John Brooke has done the same thing. If they came to me and they said, hey, look, there's a young scientist who's looking to do this, that would put them at a much higher level for me because I have that introduction from people that I trust. Okay. So I think networking and finding those mentorships is absolutely essential. I think the number two thing is asking questions. If you're in a group of business folks, be curious. Express that same curiosity that you in the laboratory into the business world. Okay. How does stock work? You tell me, what's the difference between a limited liability company and a C corporation? Ask these business oriented questions. Yeah. I've met very few people who, when I ask these questions, weren't really enthusiastic about telling me these things, like really wanting to explain to me these things, these pieces that they live with every day. And that's been very gratifying, something that I take with me as well. I've had amazing mentors as well. And so I really encourage scientists, if they're earlier on and they want to talk to folks, reach out, find those people who will talk to them and have those people introduce you to their own network of folks.
Yes.
We're talking 15 and 30-minute conversations, right? We're not talking taking people out to dinner or, even a cup of coffee. I mean, being able to get on the phone with them or be able to get on the video with them and just talk for 15 to 30 minutes can be enormously impactful and just be open to hearing what they say and to, take the advice that you're getting.
Absolutely, that's an excellent advice. Very last question. Looking back at your career, would you do any of it differently?
No, I would not. And I'm adamant about that. I've made a ton of mistakes. I've made far more mistakes than I have right decisions. I've had far more failure than I've had success. And I think that, the one defining characteristic about me is I'm trying my best to learn from those mistakes. Mm-hmm. Making a mistake unintentionally, it happens. Okay. Making a mistake, even though you knew it was wrong, that's not forgivable. That's not something you can just do, and there should be pretty severe consequences. So every time I have made a mistake, I try to get better from it. I try to learn from it. I try to say, okay, here's what happened. Let's assess it. Let's be very brutally honest. Let's look at the good things that happened and let's look at the bad things that happened. And, let's try to emphasize the good pieces and minimize the bad pieces, and try to move forward. And, I have a saying that I say a lot, 𝗍𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀. It means, we will find a way or we will make one. Yeah. And from my perspective, that if you read that sentence, you realize there's no success or failure, right? There's no good decisions, bad decisions. It's irrelevant. It doesn't ask you if you fail. It asks you, are you going to find a way or are you going to make it? And when you look at it that way, all you do is look forward. And so I am very grateful for the failures that I've earned. I'm very grateful for the people I know who have helped me, who have taught me. And I'm very grateful for being where I am right now. All the complications and all the challenges and, everything else that goes on. It is exactly what it is. So I encourage, when you're talking to scientists, and when I say the same thing, it's like, man, you're going to mess up. It's okay. You messed up a lot in the laboratory too, didn't you? Right? Right? Everybody does. That's the point, is to learn and to move forward with it. In fact, failures can lead to some really cool successes. Right?
Oh yeah.
They really can. And so you need to be very grateful for those and just keep moving forward, and just find a way to make one.
Absolutely. And to be fair, it's really, part of science. Like failure is every day, like it happens every day in science. So scientists at least are very well equipped in dealing with failure and, moving on and considering it as part of the process.
It's hard. At the end of the day, you can be like, I do it all the time too. It's like, well, what did we do today? What did we succeed today? And the only thing I can respond with is, I'll try again tomorrow. Yes. I'm getting back up. I'm getting back into it. I'll try again tomorrow, and let's see what tomorrow brings.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. It was a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have a great day. Appreciate you.